Well, hi everyone. Thanks for joining my talk. I'll start off with a very quick introduction. So as my name is Mandy, I'm a senior software development manager at Wealthsimple, where I lead the ML engineering and data engineering teams. So today I'm going to be talking about our in-house Gen AI tools, specifically around the lessons that we learn in adoption. So to start, I'll share some context about where I work. So Wealthsimple, for those who haven't heard, is a Canadian fintech company, and our mission is to help Canadians achieve their version of financial independence using our unified app, where investing, saving, and spending come together as one. And at Wealthsimple, our Gen AI efforts are primarily organized into three streams. The first is improving employee productivity. The second is to optimize operations, create a more delightful experience for our clients. And the third is the LLM platform, which is the foundational area supporting the first two pillars. So today we're really just going to focus on the first stream, the employee productivity, and specifically how our in-house tools we've developed has affected productivity and what we learned about using them. So a brief history of our LLM tooling. Last year, around this time, we developed a LLM gateway to securely proxy interactions between our employees and external Gen AI providers, such as OpenAI. And the thesis of this work was driven by, some of you might have heard, there were a few incidents last year with numerous companies. It was driven by the inadvertent oversharing of data between these companies and OpenAI, which unfortunately resulted in some of this data being exposed publicly. And as a fintech company, it was very important that this does not happen to us. So our gateway protects against that by using an in-house PI scrubber to redact potentially sensitive information when we converse with third-party providers. And we also create an audit trail of what's being shared externally, with said audit trail integrated with our internal monitoring systems. So on the slides here is a screenshot of the user interface of what our gateway looks like. And as you can see, we modeled this quite closely to ChatGPT's front end. There's a sidebar on the left where you can manage your chats, create new chats. And when you create new chats, you can select either one of these self-hosted models. So these are open source models running on our cloud environment. We're working on fine-tuning some of these models to add to the gateway as well. Or you can select from one of the third-party LLMs. So models from the Gemini series, from OpenAI, and from Cohere, and from other providers as well. Our gateway is also open sourced. The open source version is much slimmer than what we're running in-house, but if you want to check it out, it's Wealthsimple/LLM gateway, and it's on our GitHub page. And one other thing that we've built to advance the security of these features is this nudge mechanism. So if any employee visits ChatGPT or another provider directly outside of our gateway, they would receive a friendly nudge on Slack, reminding them about best security practices when using these tools and gently suggesting that they can actually use our gateway, especially if it pertains to work. And these nudges is also a very useful proxy for how much Gen AI activity is happening outside of our gateway. And for the past few months, the split is about 2/3 through the gateway and 1/3 outside of the gateway. So we have a pretty high volume of our users who rely on this technology actually using it through our gateway. And altogether, we're seeing quite a high volume of usage through both of these avenues. We also shared a survey to learn more about the intersection between Gen AI, productivity, and adoption, and there were some very interesting insights from this survey. The first is that most people actually know very little about LLMs, and this is something I constantly have to remind myself of, for those of us who are very ingrained in this space, we're living, breathing these technologies day in and day out. But for the rest of the world, there's a very non-uniform, the level of understanding is very distributed. And what we learned is that a lot of people didn't know the basics of LLMs. They didn't necessarily understand best practices, limitations, and even good versus bad examples of prompt engineering. And this became a signal to us that we we need to spend more time in education and evangelizing adoption of this technology. And that when speaking to folks across the business, it doesn't hurt to reiterate the basics. There's so much value that anyone, regardless of their level of understanding, that they can get out of this technology. And we don't want to miss out on this segment of our employees. The second is that adoption was mainly driven by engineering. So software developers, data scientists, like product managers, sitting closely within engineering. And within certain parts of the business, the adoption rate was actually very low. And with this information, it allowed us to like fine tune our strategy so that we were able to target our education efforts and evangelism efforts on those areas of the business. So, and then another thing, and this isn't that surprising, but almost everyone who use LLMs, whether it's through our gateway or outside, have found it to significantly increase their productivity. And close to half of people who use GenAI, and a large percentage of these users who found that LLMs have significantly increased their productivity, they use it almost once a day. So not only is it increasing their productivity significantly, but they also are leveraging this technology very frequently. And lastly, we saw about equal adoption between individual contributors and managers. And this to me is really a signal that like this tool has like this natural traction to take off. Like in the past, a lot of the times adoption is driven from the top down when leadership or management thinks that this is a tool that will help you, so please use it. But then without this natural push from within, we don't actually get the traction or like the long-term, or at least the long-term traction that we're hoping for. But clearly with Gen AI, it's very different. People across the company, regardless of level, regardless of tenor, they all want to use it. And in terms of how LLMs are being used, we also asked, we asked people who use the gateway primarily on how they were leveraging it, and these were the results. So not really surprising given that close to half of our users are from engineering, but the primary use case is for programming support. And second to that, it's on content generation or augmentation. So prompts such as use cases such as help me write this, edit my verbiage, or change my style. And then thirdly, another large area of the use case was made up from positioning LLMs as a search engine to either learn new terms or look up new documentation or definition. And we also conducted a lot of user interviews, and we did this with both power users, like the people who were using our gateway, using Gen AI on a day-to-day basis, as well with late adopters who did not want to use our gateway. And these were some of the themes of feedback that we heard. So on the positive side of things, accessibility and optionality was frequently brought up. A lot of the people who weren't familiar with this technology beforehand now was able to access it very easily because our gateway is exposed internally to all of our employees. You just have to be on the VPN to use it. And it's also very easy for them to choose which provider or which models they want to interface with. And they are able to do this within a single tab. They didn't have to like flip between Cohere and OpenAI or self-hosted Llama in order to pick and choose the best model for their use case. It also provided an increased confidence in leveraging Gen AI at work. So for a lot of our employees, they work with very sensitive information to both our clients and the company. And the guardrails we put in place gave them additional confidence in actually being able to leverage this technology. And thirdly, not very surprising, but we foot the bill for all of this. And especially like at the beginning where you had to pay a monthly fee to access GPT-4 through the chat UI, us being able to instrument this through the back end made it very cheap for the company and also made it free for the end users. So people were very happy about that aspects. In terms of the not as good, we had two themes that came up that were detractors to adoption. The first is that guardrails can prevent the most effective use cases of LLMs. So if you put yourself in the position of an employee at a fintech company, a lot of the times you are working with sensitive data. A lot of the times you're working directly with client PII. And when you have to run these, when you have to run your inputs through a PII redaction model, you actually lose a lot of the information and the signals from the response. And this became a huge limitation for a big part of the company to effectively do their work. And this is also what led to us prioritizing the addition of the self-hosted models. So when we started the gateway, it was just with OpenAI. Cohere was the next provider we added. But based on this feedback, based on some of our early interviews with these detractors, we realized that it's very important for us to add self-hosted models, models which run completely on our cloud environment that we're comfortable sharing any types of information with. And when we add these models, that's when people can really harness the true, like the full power of the LLM, so to speak, without having to worry about security concerns. The second feedback we received as an area of improvement was really the generic risks surrounding LLM. So this isn't unique to our gateway. Like, these are general problems people face when they interact with Gen AI. There's hallucination, there's a tendency to perpetuate bias, and there's a lack of transparency, and there's limited training data. And a common solution for this in the industry is we either ground the model against more relevant, trustworthy context, or we can improve the foundational models by either fine-tuning or training your own. So like a lot of other companies, we started with the fine-tuning route. We started with the grounding route, because that, like, building a retrieval-based augmented generation, and then we have been evolving into fine-tuning. So before I share the next stage of our journey, I want to share some of our recent usage metrics. So the adoption of the gateway has increased substantially over the past year. On a daily basis, we receive over 2,000 messages through the gateway, and it's being used on a weekly. Our weekly active users make up about 28% of the company, and our monthly active users make up just slightly over half of the company. And for nearly all of these people, it had a marked improvement on their productivity, and the user satisfaction of interacting with our gateway is quite high. So taking the feedback about multi-stage retrieval systems, we used RAG to build a personal assistant grounded against Wealthsimple context to supercharge employee productivity. So I'm gonna play a quick video, a recording of how this works, but essentially this is a tool where people can upload their own context or choose from an existing context, and it will ground the model to answer their questions or to generate responses based on the context provided. So in this example, we're showing what it's like to upload a ad hoc document, and once you add it, this becomes a private context which you're able to use. We also have different roles and scopes being managed here, so admins can create public context when admins can create context, public context, which the entire company can leverage. And we also have a denomination of limited context, so a knowledge base that can only be shared with a limited set of coworkers delineated by role and project. So in this example, we're uploading the McKinsey study on the impacts of generative AI on productivity, and it's able to return answers from the study to answer questions around productivity. And we've also baked in a feature to show your work. So we actually reference from where in the context, or sometimes the context will be made up of multiple documents, but we'll also reference where this is coming from, so our end users can fact check the responses or follow up to learn more. And so this really helps us. Oh, sorry. So being able to ground this context against our knowledge bases really helps improve or reduce some of the risks that we normally see around bias, hallucination, the limited training data, and the lack of transparency. And what we did after releasing Booster Pack, we called this Simple Booster Pack, by the way. The next step we did after releasing this was we started building these nightly jobs, which would look into all of our knowledge sources. So our knowledge management systems, our Slack, and some of the other sources we use to manage our information. And it would actually update the embeddings for these knowledge sources every single day, so that when you talk to Booster Pack, you can always get the latest, most up-to-date information. And unlike the gateway, where adoption was kind of slow at the beginning and kind of took off in the middle and the end, everyone was really excited about Booster Pack, and almost right away we had a quarter of the company using it on a weekly basis, and then that has now progressed to close to half of the company. So as our LLM tooling becomes more mature, we're also learning more about the behavioral aspects of these tools. So I have here on the screen two very important lessons. I think these are probably our two most important takeaways about behavior and adoption over the past 2 years. Over the past year. And the first is that LLM tools are the most valuable when injected in the places we do work. So movement of information between platforms is actually very, very toilsome. With the gateway as an example, if you had to ask the gateway for a response, copy and paste the answer, and then send it to your coworker in Slack, you're a lot less incentivized to use it. So we really had to think about integrating our tools within the places that people do work. And some examples of this are like Copilot, for instance. Copilot is integrated within code editors, and that makes the adoption very seamless. We actually took some of these feedback and built a Slack bot for our LLM gateway, so that you could actually talk to our gateway directly in Slack. And this prevents the movement, or this reduces the movement of information between platforms. And right away, we saw this marked increase in adoption. And the second lesson around behavior, which is actually very similar, is that having to visit multiple places for Gen AI tools is a very confusing experience. So this was kind of a lesson we learned the hard way, but over the past year, we've been adding more and more Gen AI tools. And as a number of these tools grew, we noticed that most people actually stuck to using a single tool. Even those who were super enthusiastic about LLMs, they weren't learning 3 or 4 tools at the same time. And when we talked to them about it, what the feedback was very similar. It was that I don't want to have to visit 7 places for my Gen AI needs. I'm just going to pick the one I'm the most familiar with, or I'm going to pick the one I like the most, and I'm just going to stick to that one. And this for us has been kind of a work in progress, but there's a need to consolidate these tools within a single landing page. And I think a lot of the times, even for people who are familiar with this technology, they want convention over configuration. They don't want to choose oh, do I need a RAG system, or do I want to talk to a LLM directly? For the most of the users, they want us to make that decision for them based on their use case, provide the most suitable framework for them to interact with this technology. So we have a lot of learnings. There's a lot of excitement over the next few months. The consolidation of these tools into a single landing page is something that is very top of mind for us as we evolve these tooling. We're also thinking about more ways of injecting these tools into the places that people do work. And we're also starting to build up the platform support for fine-tuning, because that's definitely the next stage of where we want to take our models to make it more relevant. So to kind of summarize what I've been talking about, LLMs has been a huge boon to productivity. We have numerous internal use cases, as well as workflows in production where LLMs are actually being used to optimize operations and provide a better client experience. And when it comes to adoption, it won't be uniform across the org. Evangelism, education plays a big role in fostering that, but also understanding user behavior. So that's everything I have. Thanks everyone for listening.